There is now recording in progress. Welcome to everyone to Amalgamation, Creating Hybrid Creatures. I am Michael Habib, and I will be sort of emceeing here for a bit. And we are joined most notably by the wonderful, legendary, and delightful Terryl Whitlatch, who is waving there, and who will be providing the demo and most of today's presentation. Like I said, I will be essentially playing host, but Terryl and I will be co-presenting on much of the time on things that we are working on together. So we have some exciting joint projects, and we will be talking a little bit today about some of the fundamentals related to those projects, or that we've sort of extracted from those projects, regarding particularly how to create compelling creatures that are a mix of real animals or real animals and humans, which is a very common kind of industry commission. That's something that is a staple in fantasy and sci-fi literature, and therefore also in fantasy and sci-fi games, film, shorts, television, you name it. And so we will we'll be trying to pull out what we think are some of the most important aspects of that kind of process that you all can take away from this and use in your own designs and work. So without further ado, move along. So a quick introduction about myself. Because far be it from me not to take at least some opportunity to be the center of attention. My name is Dr. Michael Habib. Mike is just fine. I am a PhD scientist, illustrator, sort of combination, as it were. I work as a professor as well as a research associate at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, and as a grants and conservation initiatives director and writer for the Greater Los Angeles Zoo Association. So I work at the LA Zoo, Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, College of the Canyons. I was a full-time professor for many years. Now I am doing that part-time, a lot of other things. And I'm also a freelance illustrator and creature consultant. So I spend a good bit of time working on various games projects, television projects. I've worked on a couple dozen shows at this point, fair number on my hat, and some feature films as well, helping animators work up realistic anatomy that will work in the rigging process more seamlessly, and just generally deriving more inspiration from real creatures, be they living or fossil. Of course, a lot of what I do is bringing to bear the anatomy of fossil organisms as a paleontologist. So that is my sort of my background and my part to play in this. I am your resident anatomist artist, I suppose, and probably doesn't need much introduction, but certainly deserves a grand one. So this is Terryl Whitlatch that will be doing a wonderful demo for you, saying hello there in the on her side video. Terryl, like I said, is a legend. I'm sure most of you are here to see what she has to show and hear what she has to say, and that is very well informed, for she is in fact one of the greatest creature designers of our time. She is famous for her work for ILM, work on the Star Wars saga, is one of the primary creature designers, particularly for Phantom Menace. She's worked for EA Games. She's done a lot of work for Disney feature animation, for Pixar, you name it. She's done it. I've heard her referred to regularly as the Queen of Creatures, and it is a title that is very well deserved. She's also been my delightful project partner for almost 5 years now, I think, is when we first met and been working together, Terryl. So and it has been absolutely phenomenal. totally changed my life and is always a pleasure to work with. And at some point, if time permits, perhaps I'll tell the story of how we first met and the fact that I was fanboying hard. So without any further discussion of ourselves, we will, I'm sure you guys will have some more questions, particularly for Terryl in terms of her career and activities. We can get to that a little later. We will have lots of time for Q&A, and I will do my best to get through all of them. I did want to introduce some of our guiding principles for hybrid creatures. So first and foremost, you should try to do more than just bolt things together. The least compelling hybrid creatures are things where you took some parts from one thing and just attached them to another thing. Now, occasionally, that's the look you're looking for. If it's a Frankenstein's monster bit and you literally want to look like creatures are sewn together, that's perhaps a different scenario. But when we're talking about hybrid creatures, that is, it should have aspects of creature A and aspects of creature B, or maybe it needs those aspects because it's supposed to be able to do the things that those two creatures can do. You have multiple kinds of abilities combined into one creature, and that's part of what's important for the story. That's what we're really talking about when we say a hybrid creature here. And in order for that to really play, it's a compelling storytelling element. It should do more than just bolt it together. You want to do more than just stick a set of wings on the back, for example, and say, well, now it's a flying thing. Well, that
I think Riley's here.
How wings work. And so that being the case, we'll get to some examples of how to make this more seamless. You do want to blend the traits as seamlessly as you can. And where possible, it shouldn't be terribly obvious where one base creature starts and the other one begins. And Terryl, just as a quick heads up, I did just mute everyone, including you. You may want to go ahead and unmute yourself. We were getting some background sound from another individual's mic, which I'm sure was just an accident. But it was quick. There you go. As quick as it hit mute all. All right. The next kind of key principle that we'll be going into will be finding the key features of each underlying creature. So and sort of distilling it down. So you're not going to include everything from each underlying creature that you're molding together. You want to really identify, what is it about this creature that I need? Is it something about the teeth and the mouth that I need for a fearsome look in the face? Is it that I need a flying version of something that doesn't normally fly, so I need the wings and other flight apparatus, the flight muscles of the thing that does fly that I'm putting into the thing that doesn't, etc. Things like that. Okay, so you want to know what it is that you actually need from each creature. Otherwise, it can very easily become just kind of a random feeling blend that doesn't seem like it has any storytelling purpose. You want to think about how the anatomy actually would work. This will give you insights into how to create story around that creature, and how it's going to fit into your environment. And because how its anatomy work will tell you something about its performance and therefore what it might do on a daily basis and such. But also, many of these projects, probably for most of you here, and certainly for most of the work that I've done and most of the work Terrell's done, the ultimate outcome is an animated character, be it more traditional animation, 3D animation, photorealistic animation, whatever it happens to be, that thing has to move in a way that reads well to an audience. That means that it has to go through the rigging process in a seamless way and come out the other side looking like something that actually works. And you basically do that by being able to visualize, sometimes literally visualizing the internal architecture. Terrell's a real master at this, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about this shortly, because she builds these amazing musculatures and skeletal anatomies for so many of her creatures because of her background as a zoologist, and that really makes the difference. And if I remember correctly, Terrell, that had a lot to do with you being picked up for Phantom Menace.
Yeah, actually, just being picked up by Lucasfilm in general. Again, my my portfolio, I was hired out of school, and I had a portfolio or that didn't have any space aliens or any aliens or imaginary creatures whatsoever. It was all actual um, wildlife and some dinosaurs. And they hired me to be a creature designer. They said, this is what we need. We need someone that understands the anatomy. Because for one thing, creature design is more than just imaginary beings. A lot of creature design is of actual animals. And my first work I did for Lucasfilm was on the Dig, a particular video game by LucasArts way back when. But my first feature was Jumanji, and rhinoceroses and zebras and evil monkeys and the whole shebang. And so yeah, the anatomy, that is why they hired me. So
My favorite, by the way, in that I love Jumanji, by the way, Terrell, and have since I was a kid. And my favorite in there by far are the evil monkeys. They make me laugh every time I watch that film, and I've watched it a great number of times. They're like hilariously evil. It's fantastic. Like just the perfect blend of hilarious and frightening. And you know what? Actually, mischievous monkeys are very much like that. Someone who works for a zoo again. Interesting bit of background. I know you know this, Terrell, but others here might not. So I started in the biological sciences and kind of started my path as a zookeeper. So I was a zookeeper for about 8.5 years, and yeah, that's it's amazing the things that some creatures actually do.
yeah.
Any case, so we will. Speaking of, actually, one of our first creatures to discuss here is largely primate based, and so we'll want to move on to that. And I will just say, kind of lastly, but certainly not least. Always remember to match the story to the creature and vice versa, right? So there should be an environment here. You might have had the environment first and you're trying to design a creature to go in it, or it might be that the creature itself for some reason has an important storytelling aspect, and then you have to kind of build an ecology and a lifestyle around it. It can go either way, and often it's going both directions at once. It's often a double-ended arrow, but it is a very important double-ended arrow. And then your prime directive, keep it fun. And whatever that fun may be, it should be fun for you, and also, of course, fun for the audience, whether or not they're being scared for entertainment or it's whimsical entertainment, whatever happens to be, keep it fun. So one of the exemplars of this, and a good segue from Jumanji, is our flying monkeys. So how do you make a monkey fly? A few different anatomical aspects come into play, and the principles we just talked about all come into play. This particular creature, this particular build, by the way, is featured in our upcoming book that Terrell and I have, Flying Monsters, Illustrating Flying Invertebrates. And this is one of, I think, our mutual favorites for this particular book. So a few things that it highlights. You'll see that it's a quadrupedal flyer. So we're using the base quadrupedal four-limbed anatomy of the monkey because hexapods get very complicated. Sometimes you have to do a hexapod because that's a key part of the story, certain traditional Western dragons and things of that nature. But it actually is much easier to make this work in a plausible, realistic, and range of motion tractable way as a quad. So that's what we're going with. Many primates already have long forelimbs. So again, finding those key traits. What can you use they already have? Well, a lot of primates have long forelimbs already, so that's convenient. That you don't have to do as much with it to put a wing on there. And there's do we have to consider what kind of wing you're going to put on it, though? There's different ways of building a wing. You have membranes, you have feathers. We're going with membrane wings here, and then you need to tension them, and there's different kinds of membrane wings. So you can take lessons from lots of different sorts of critters. The obvious ones for membrane wings are typically pterosaurs, the fossil record, the big flying reptiles that are often called dinosaurs, but weren't. Closely related, though. So your pterodactyls, quote unquote. and from living creatures, it typically be bats, would be the classic ones. And both of those are using some sort of limb elements. So a giant fourth finger, the body and the hind limb in a pterosaur detention, the wing membrane. And in the case of a bat, it's 4 of the 5 fingers of the hand that are providing us the tension. Note that typically the a membrane wing to be tensioned has to have a concave or at most straight trailing edge. These sort of convex trailing edges have become very popular as a kind of a look. It looks pretty neat, but actually you can't really do that without battens. That said, there is another group of often overlooked membrane wing flyers that do just that, can actually have a concave trailing edge because they have battens basically available within their membranes, and that's fish. So there are, of course, gliding fish. And you could argue that actually flying fish are powered flyers because they can dip their tail in to propel. So they can actually get flight thrust while using their pectoral fins as their weight supporting surfaces, which is pretty cool. But regardless, the neat anatomical trick here is that these membranes actually have fin rays running through them that allows them to be convex, and it allows them to tension a surface for both swimming and for flight, which is a very cool idea. And so this is our sea monkey. And at this point, I have said more than enough. So I am going to now hand it over to the wonderful, legendary, and delightful Terryl Whitlatch to talk a bit about one of her creations. And here it is. So without further ado, Terryl, I give it over to you.
All right. So can you see my cursor moving too? It's my cursor. Anyway, so this is a sea monkey, and it's the whole idea started with when I was a kid. I'd read lots of comic books, and there's always these advertisements on usually the back page of the comic book. Well, order your little sea monkeys, and they have this whole wonderful illustration of these rather anthropomorphized beings that I thought, oh, that'd be really pretty cool to have those. And of course, as a little child, I didn't quite realize that that was a lot of artistic license taken. What I actually did get was in the mail was brine shrimp, but that was pretty cool. And so I had those little brine shrimp for a long time. But anyway, so I was just kind of thinking to myself, what would perhaps an actual sea monkey look like? And we're not really going to leave planet Earth here at all, but if an existing species of monkey, let's go to maybe the coast of Africa, decided that they are going to adopt an aquatic lifestyle. Maybe these are members of the Ganon family, similar to a de Brazza's Ganon or a green monkey. And so I basically took, that species and gave it quills. These would be adapted hair, like porcupine quills. So I'm taking the mammal model. I'm not going outside of the mammal group because I'm being really careful that I want to create a creature that can stand on its, well, in this case, its own 4 feet, and not be a chimera. A chimera is what Mike was talking about. That's a Frankensteinian thing that's bolted together. But I wanted, rather than have a monkey with, I don't know, swan wings, I wanted a monkey that would have its own wings that could be conceivable. And so we have a derivations again of quills, again, like porcupines. Those are basically thickened, fused hair. And so these are forming those battens, those tensioning rods that Mike was referring to. And of course, all mammals have skin. And so very much like, a bat, you're going to have skin in between these battens. And so I'm picturing this animal more as a glider as opposed to so much of rather than a flapping flyer, because it doesn't have the great big pectoral muscles that would be necessary for a bird. However, these monkeys are capable of pretty substantial leaps. And so having expanded and fortified wings between its forelegs and the top of the shoulders. It could even attach midway along the body axis too, would enable it to do these really powerful leap glides. And so perhaps it's lives on rocky cliffs on the ocean shore, similar like to what you might find in some parts of Africa, these abrupt cliffs, or the Oregon coast or the Maine coast, that sort of jagged cliffs. And so it forages along those that landscape and possibly dips into tide pools and etc. So I was, imagining what these animals already can do, and then with these added accoutrements, what they could do in a story. And then, of course, the bright patterns is always kind of nice. Perhaps these animals use these bright patterns for a startle effect against enemies, like, oh, don't touch me, or maybe they're poisonous, don't eat me, or maybe it's like attracting a mate. Look at me, I'm really fit and I'm beautiful. And it may be also to uh, compete against other monkeys for mates. Maybe the females have more subdued patterns, and maybe the males have brighter colors, which seems to be common across the board in most vertebrate species outside of certain parrots. And so that was my thought process was in this particular type of flying monkey. Sorry about that. Put my phone away.
Terryl is very popular. I warned you.
I think that was spam. And so that's the story behind this particular amalgamation. And the shape of the wings were sort of inspired, I will say, by the sea robin or the flying gurnard fish, which are pretty bizarre and interesting fish anyway. So there we go.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is definitely one of my absolute favorites, and for the book, and it's just so lovely. I wish they were real. This is one of these things that you just like wish they were real, and such a neat way of building a plausible, what we would call amphibious flyer. So an amphibious flyer in the biological literature, for those who are not familiar, is something that can both swim and fly in an aerial sense with its wings, with the same surface. And now, not truly a monkey, but another primate, and a really great option for this build, because they have such extended forelimbs already, is our powered flying winged gibbon. And I can't decide whether or not this animal is adorable or terrifying. But I will hand it over to you again, Terryl, to tell us more about this wonderful build.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So this was inspired by actually a little sketch that Mike came up with on another conference that I think we were attending. Was it an Adobe conference in LA, one of those small conferences. And so gibbons and siamang is a type of gibbon as well, are basically, they're anthropoid apes. They're not monkeys. Monkeys are referred to technically, like the one I drew before. Those would be usually long-tailed, smaller primates. Although there are big ones like baboons. But the anthropoid apes usually don't have tails, and they tend to have longer forelegs. And in the case of gibbons, really extreme forelimbs for swinging and brachiating through the treetops. So these animals spend most of their time in trees, and and when they're locomoting, a great deal of time actually swinging and in the air a lot of the times, just by force of propelling. And so we thought, well, gee, what if we went the extra mile and made it so these animals truly could fly on their own power? And so the natural inspiration was, bats, especially for me, the really big giant fruit bats, which can get pretty big. And but rather than doing exact bat wings, what I did was I reduced the number of fingers on each hand. I let the thumb stay behind, because thumbs are useful objects to have, and bats included have quite extensive thumbs. But I gave it just the two fingers for tensioning, rather than all um, four fingers here. And part of that is that because this animal, it started out as brachiating, and so it can fly and brachiate and fly and brachiate. In one way it launches itself is by means of swinging from one branch to the other and then letting go. And so, yeah, like right there. So it can grab a branch. You can see where it's curled in this stage of the fly. It can grab with these two fingers. We have just two fingers, so there's not complications by adding extra fingers. And then it can let go, if we can see in the third illustration, to swing itself into the air. The other thing with this animal is that it has an expanded chest, which allows larger pectoral muscles. It's kind of like on a bat model, not quite as big as birds, but they're pretty substantial. And and so that's how it flies. It launches itself through brachiation into the air and then takes it from there. This animal, I would say, is probably omnivorous. It's got really long canines, potentially dangerous. In fact, you probably don't want to pet a gibbon that you see in the zoo, because that would not be a good idea. And I would also imagine that it also has kind of a general dentition in its mouth. But let's say that this animal is omnivorous. And so if you're going to design, evil monkeys, they don't have to be, scary looking, but it's what they do that can be pretty scary. Sometimes it's an animal that can be very attractive that's actually quite dangerous and quite scary. It's like what we call a menacing beauty. Same way that a tiger is beautiful, but you don't want to meet it in the jungle in its own turf. And so this is one of these interesting animals where we're taking nature, very much on nature, and following natural principles in the way it can move, and then you come up with an animal that's at home in its environment, and that has so much storytelling potential because it can thrive and survive with not having to use extra explanation as why this animal can live where it does, which is basically jungle areas. But it could probably be right at home swinging around the city parks or other things. I mean, just like primates today in India and such kind of invade urban settings, this animal could do the same thing. So that's sort of the backstory of this creature.
Certainly one of my favorites. I really enjoy gibbons in general. They've always been a favorite animal of mine. And I was recently told a fun story, which I feel like kind of fits in well here. The ability to launch themselves airborne by brachiating, by my friend and colleague David Hone, based out of Queen Mary University in London. And apparently the zoo, one of the zoos there, I'm not sure if it's the main zoo in London or a smaller institution, has a gibbon that was rescued, but unfortunately was so badly injured when he was found that they had to amputate one of his arms. And he can still brachiate.
Wow.
He does it with one arm. He swings with an arm and then he lets go, brings that arm through and catches the next branch with it. And so he's going ballistic on every swing. And he doesn't get quite around quite as well as the others, of course, but he gets around well enough. And apparently he's in a really tall, also they built this like kind of almost like an aviary thing around all these giant trees. So he's doing this with enough confidence, far enough above the ground that if he missed, he could get injured. And he still does it. He never misses.
Mhm.
It's really very, very cool.
That is amazing. It just shows how persistent and adaptable life is. I mean, life wants to live, and it
Hmm.
finds a way. It finds a way.
For sure, for sure. So we're going to move on to another creature, another hybrid build inspired by a classic legend. And this is a legend that very likely started, although we don't know for certain, with stories from sort of my professional realm, which is the realm of studying fossils. And sort of before the science of paleontology, fossils of ceratopsians from particularly Protoceratops from what is now Mongolia and Inner Mongolia of China are may have inspired these ideas of a cat bird of prey mix of some kind, and these stories could have easily been passed along. You know, they've seen these skeletons. You don't have a concept of extinction, then you might think that the skeletons are things that have died fairly recently, and it might get them passed along. You know, Silk Road routes and things like that. It's certainly plausible for anyone who's seen photos of the fossils in, for example, the in like the Flaming Cliffs region or what have you, where Protoceratops is quite common. You'll know that actually the bones are preserved there bright white. They look like a fresh bone, and so you can easily imagine that this might have been the start of the story. Regardless, the legends of griffins became quite popular, and the motif became quite popular throughout much of the Middle East and Mediterranean for actually a number of centuries. And the creature was said to be part cat and part bird, usually a mix of a lion and an eagle. And they were typically depicted as guardians of treasure and other precious things. And Terrell and I got to thinking, actually, this was really Terrell's idea. It was really cute. She says, well, the most precious things are your family, right? So what if you could have your very own small griffin to guard your most precious thing of all, your family? What about a house griffin? And I believe you also call this the catarrhal.
Yes.
And so I will once again hand it over to Terrell to tell us a little bit more about her house griffin, the adorable but possibly still slightly fierce catarrhal.
Oh, well, thank you, Mike. So this is my idea of the catarrhal, and the animals that inspired it, of course, is I was looking a lot at barn owls because barn owls are lovely and they're intriguing, and I love the beautiful white face that it has, kind of a mysterious heart-shaped face. And then I was also looking at the ancestor of our domestic cats, which would be the African wildcat. And African wildcats look pretty much the same as your typical tabby cat. They might be just maybe a little bit lighter in build, but basically that's what they look like. And so I wanted to take those two wild species, and we have the barn owl on one hand and the African wildcat, ancestor of all domestic cats, on the other. Both tend to be nocturnal or dusk and dawn active species when they do their hunting. So they had that in common. Both of them have large, very soulful eyes, and it just seemed to be a normal inspiration back and forth. Of course, though, I didn't want to create something that was the parts of a owl and the hind parts of a cat. I didn't want to do a classical chimeric um, griffin, so I just tried mixing the DNA, the genetics together to get a creature that could also leap, glide, and be an effective hunter, and also be, attractive. So here we have the caterwaul in action. It's going after some sort of purple creature thingy, and the wings echo feathers. It's almost like it's a bit of like convergent evolution. These are actually feathers that are composed of skin that have very lightweight fur or on top of them. So they're not like exactly the same as bird feathers, but they echo bird feathers. And I guess one thing just to keep in common is that hair, fur, and feathers are all basically made of keratin anyway. So it's not too big a leap. No pun intended, because the animal is leaping. Um, this animal is able to have very keen hearing. It has that aspect of that disc-like face that helps gather in sound vibrations, and also keen ears. And so this animal hunts by stealth. It hunts by kind of a leap glide. It can capture almost basket-like or net-like animals in its winged forelimbs. And cats, they basically, when they're hunting, they grab things, they wrestle them to the ground with those strong forelimbs of them anyway, and then they give like the lethal bite. Whereas um, um, animals like wolves and dogs, conversely, tend to use their jaws a lot more in nabbing prey. Hence, cats have short jaws, and I'm digressing a little bit, and dogs slash wolves, foxes have longer jaws. But anyway, that's just one, shows you one way of making choices when you're designing predatorial animals, of which this one is. But this animal is small enough for you to um, hold. It can nestle on your lap. So it's a good way of guarding your household, a good way of keeping your household free of vermin. And it was this thought would be really kind of fun. You have a little bit of wildness in your house, just the same way that if you have a pet cat, you're inviting a little bit of wildness in into your house, which is kind of the whole idea. So this is your basic little cat griffin, and I imagine that given enough time, you would probably have Persian, Siamese, and who knows what else versions of this particular animal.
Yep, absolutely. I would love to see all the different color variations, actually, all the different coats. There are a few other aspects here from a kind of a flight performance and mechanic standpoint that you took into account, Terrell, that I wanted to highlight as well. You took the care to add what's called an alula, which is this feather that comes out as what I call a vortex generator for low speed flight landings and things like that on flyers. Well, it's got an adjustable alula off the thumb, which I thought was a very cool trick right here. And you also added the fringing not only on the trailing edge, but most importantly here on the leading edge of the wing, which is what gives owls their silent flight. So the owl feathers are a little softer on the trailing edge than other birds of prey, for example, and most other birds, but that's not really where most of the silencing happens. Most of the silencing on an owl wing happens because there's this really interesting comb. It looks like almost looks like if you blow it up, looks like you could comb your hair with it. A comb of extensions off the leading edge of the feathers on that like I said, the leading edge, on that leading edge of the wing. So that's really critical. And in any case, that's a really cool nod. And then lastly, you mentioned leaping and being a good leaper. As a general principle, or something to bring to play for your flying creatures in general, keep in mind that most flyers are very good leapers, because they have to be a good leaper in order to launch. And some of them will do a run into a leap if they have, for example, if they're aquatically adapted and their hind limbs aren't particularly or sort of compromised between swimming and terrestrial locomotion, then they might have to opt for a running take off. It's not size related. That's a myth. But it's but you know, so you kind of your swan type of build or something like that. But one way or the other, they're going to need strong leaping limbs. Now, the one exception is if you have something that's suspensory like a bat. Some bats leap from the ground very well, actually, leap off their wings and feet to launch. But there are some that are specialists. They're hyper aerial specialists. Suspensory launchers, they never come to the ground. If they get stuck on the ground, they're pretty stuck. They and what they do actually is they do what I call a slingshot, which is they flap their wings through a few cycles first before they've let go of the branch, and then they let go. But if you're doing anything that's supposed to be hearkening to a bird or anything like that, you want a base that's a very good jumper. And of course, cats are amazing jumpers, so it makes them just a natural for something like this, which is a great principle to include. That brings us to our next critter here, which is going to some more ancient stories, perhaps some of the most ancient of the stories of hybrid creatures, and those are the dragons of the East. And keep in mind that this is just a translation that they're considered to be dragons. There's no relationship here between these stories and what we call dragons from European and to some extent North African legends. And so these these animals or these creatures were conceived of as a seamless blend of other animals. They're unlike the kind of classic Western dragon, which is sort of a personification of destructive power in usually reptilian form, with often very depicted as very sort of crocodilian or lizard-like with additional flight ability. Asian dragons have always been conceived of, and are always were, at least in the original oral traditions, were always described as being largely comprised of fish aspects, particularly carp, and then mammals, dogs and large cats, and then probably some reptile components as well, likely crocodilians and maybe some snake in there as well. But despite being very serpentine in body form, they're not classically. We've taken a little different approach here, as you'll see in a moment, but not classically necessarily a snake-dominated animal. They're not associated with fire. They're associated with rivers, rain, storms, and lightning. And this is one of the reasons why the fish aspect is in there, because these are considered to be strong swimmers. They're a semi-aquatic animal. They're a water animal, and you can imagine why they would have been associated with that, and kind of how their personality comes in there, because these are stories being told by cultures that had a love-hate relationship with rivers, and in some cases, in Japan, for example, with the yearly snow melts, because they relied on the floods, the yearly floods or melts to bring fresh water in and fertilize croplands, but they also killed. A bad flood year could kill thousands or even millions of people, and so or destroy a harvest. And so you're talking about a temperamental animal, right? It's temperamental like the river. It's ultimately mostly good. It's an auspicious creature for the most part, but you do not anger it, or it is very dangerous. And so these are some of the oldest stories, really, of hybrid creatures. And I'm going to blow it up here so you can see our build. This is the version that we did for the upcoming book, but there's a very similar, although slightly different build that was done for a Scientific American article that some of you may have seen recently that Terryl and I collaborated on. Did a Flights of Fancy article for Scientific American that came out in the April issue of this year. If anyone wants to go back and find that, you can still order it. I know you can at least order a digital copy. They might still have some print copies for sale. And so with that, I will hand it over to Terryl to describe a little bit about how we went about doing this.
Okay, so we took for one of our inspirations in order for this animal to become airborne without wings, because typically you don't see Asian dragons with wings, unlike the bat-winged or Western dragons. these animals seem to just kind of exist in the air or in the water just because they can. But from a zoological viewpoint, how would that be done? And so we looked at um, flying snakes. There's actually a type of snake that can expand its ribs, and you can see in the little inset there and part of the backbone, the ribs expand to create a gliding platform along the entire length of the body. And so this allows the snake, when it launches itself from treetops, or perhaps in the case of the Asian dragon from the top of a waterfall, it allows it to glide quite ably. And so that is how this particular animal is able to stay airborne, and given enough thermal lift, it could perhaps and wind, it perhaps could stay airborne almost indefinitely and ride the storms and ride the hurricanes and do all that scary weather stuff that Mike was alluding to. And so, yeah, you know, water in the air, water on the ground, all that river, sky, rain aspects that we associate with Asian dragons. This dragon also, Mike referred to fish, particularly carp, has fairly large kind of roundish scales all along its body, and that is very typical of a Asian dragon. And if you look at your goldfish, a goldfish is a type of carp. It has those same type of round scales. Uh, and also like certain other types of fish, and I've exaggerated it somewhat, this dragon has barbels on its chin, and those are those long streamers behind it. Now, some fish, you see that, particularly on certain species of catfish. What we've done here is just exaggerate those barbels and those whiskery aspects, and you see those on Asian dragons. There's ear-like structures there. They don't necessarily aren't necessarily analogous to the outer ears of mammals, but they resemble them. And those horn-like structures, which aren't really horns, they're just horn-shaped. And some Asian dragons actually do have antlers, depicted as having antlers, but these would be just aspects of spines or fins, characteristic, for example, that you would see in, say, frilled lizards, but just given a different shape. So we're looking at biological roots and commonalities that this animal could also engender without going into the realm of magical just juxtapositions of other body parts from different animals. So we're trying very hard to create a believable biological entity, and this is what we came up with. And the tail at the very end of the tail tip, that was inspired by fish tails. In a typical bony fish, there is in the formation of the caudal fin, which is the tail fin, at the base of that, there are bony structures that can almost form like a plate-like aspect from which the fin rays grow out of. And so I put that there as a bow to its aquatic origins for this animal. And then also it can just provide some more surface area for when it is actually in its glide flight on the thermals. So that's what went into that animal. And then the pattern was inspired by a species of king snake, which are very, very beautiful. And Asian dragons often have beautiful, bright colors, often in either gold or red. And so why not choose a coloration that has both of those? And so the king snake was one of those inspirations.
I had a lot of good photo references for king snakes on hand. His name is Luke. My pet of many years. and also of interest, I think another aspect that we talked about a little bit with many of the reptiles that were particularly snakes that were inspiration here with real gliding snakes. So there are living gliding snakes called Chrysopelea is the genus, paradise tree snakes. There's 3 species in one genus in Southeast Asia that can glide. They actually glide quite well. Funny story about that in a moment. And there's a little bit of Malagasy leaf nose snake and some Asian vine snake in here, a Heteroella, which is one of my favorites. And the king snake pattern. One thing they all have in common is they're all primarily lizard hunters. And so one of the fun things we did with the version for Scientific American was we had hunting Western dragons, which were more of a typical lizard-based build. And by this, of course, I mean for the biologists in the group, non-snake lizards. Snakes are technically derived lizards, but any case, and so we had this sort of like, I guess it was it's like a marine iguana, partially inspired Western dragon, and this guy was hunting it. You might imagine maybe it has rear fangs, just like some of those other snakes do for with venom that's specific to other reptiles for hunting them. And the Chrysopelea to glide do flatten out their bodies. Now this has been extended out and made more extreme, so it's almost like a cobra's hood all the way down, which have that extra extensibility near the head. But there are, like I said, real gliding snakes that flatten out the body and do S curves in the air to glide, which with the leading edge switching on each S curve, with that leading edge being angled to produce a significant amount of aeromechanical force for mostly lift oriented is weight support. And interestingly enough, one of my favorite stories about is about how good they actually are at gliding. So the world expert on their gliding mechanics is a guy named Jake Soka. He's an old acquaintance of mine, and his fluid mechanics partner on the projects is someone I actually know a little bit better, named Lorena Barba. She's a fantastic fluid mechanist working at George Washington University. Jake's at Virginia Tech, and they've done a lot of live video work with these gliding snakes. And he had one undergraduate who joined the team who was really interested in the project because of the physics involved and engineering involved, but did not like snakes. And she's like, I really want to work on this project. I know it's all about snakes, but oddly enough, I'm not comfortable on snakes. He's like, that's okay. We'll have you film the launch. So what they would do is they get them up on this tower and they would flush them off the tower, and the snake would glide across this unused football field, I think it was. And then he had a group of students on the other end who would then wrangle, pick it up and to do another round. And he wanted to get a ventral view, a belly view of it taking off. So she would be right at the base of the tower and it would just sail over her however many stories up it started. She's like, okay, I could totally do that. That's fine. He says the first day she was on the project was the day they discovered that they can do 180-degree turns in the air. It's like some kind of weird karma. The thing goes off the tower, it's gliding across the field. It remembers, wait, every time I land down there, those guys catch me, pulls a 180-degree turn in the air, still flying, just flips around, goes 180 degrees, right back the way it came, and lands on this young woman. Not near her, on her. And apparently she was scarred for life. Although, testament to her resilience and strength of will, she did not abandon the project. She did ask, however, for a slightly different assignment. Which I think was very fair under circumstances. Nothing like being told, yeah, poor girl. I mean, nothing like being told by your new advisor, you'll be fine. You don't get anywhere near the snake and it lands on you, right? Day one. But she's anyway, that was some years ago. She has subsequently finished and gone to a graduate program, and she's a very talented aeromechanist. So it all worked out in the end, but it was a bad day for her. All right. Now, some of you hopefully saw the activity prompt that we provided. If you didn't, you can go take a look at it now. But it's all about building your own Lovecraftian creature from Call of Cthulhu. So there are certain versions, if you will, of the classic Cthulhu creature that have become the iconic look, if you will. But there's really no particular reason for this. As Terryl pointed out as we were putting this together, the actual description of this creature is very tremendous ambiance. It's done in a very very interesting poetic kind of way, but from an actual detailed description, it's kept quite vague. And so it's left to the reader's imagination to kind of imagine their own horror to a certain degree. And yet this kind of humanoid with, the Davy Jones tentacle face is kind of become the classic. And while that's okay, we as artists working on new stories or new versions of stories and trying to tell the best stories we can that are compelling, we want to be able to embrace a new look or new idea. So the prompt here was to build a new version, your own idea, following the principles that we've gone over here. That is not a simple humanoid take. And so, Terryl, if you want to talk a little bit about this version, if you will, your kind of, I think, take on the classic, and then we'll show your alternative, and then we are going the most of the second half of today's presentation is actually we're gonna stream Magma Studio, and some people can actually join us over there, and Terrell's gonna do some sketching, and we're gonna do some Q&A. So and we can talk a little bit more about what you guys came up with. So Terryl, if you want to take it from here.
Okay, I will do so. And so here is a sketch of, I'm going to call it your typical conventional Cthulhu. Basically what we're used to seeing on the covers of books or in magazines or weird tales, where those stories were originally published by H.P. Lovecraft. But the actual description of a Cthulhu is in kind of a mixture of a dragon. It's greenish. Yes, it does have some tentacles, but it doesn't say where those tentacles are. It's sort of, what else was it? It wasn't described as particularly humanoid, but it's able to leap and bound. It's very nimble. It's definitely carnivorous. It is not your best friend. It's likes to leap at you out of the dark. And there's some conflicting things. It's supposed to be really, really big, but yet it seems to jump out of you from dark corners in the crumbling hotels in inbred villages of New England and Maine. So it can't be as large as a Jolly Green Giant, or it couldn't leap and hide in the corners of your closet and get you. It's basically the ultimate boogeyman, or the creature that's hiding in your closet that jumps out of the dark and eats you and dismembers you in horrible ways. So even if your house is as large as Collingwood Mansion from Dark Shadows, it still can't be as big as Godzilla. So basically, okay, it's still going to be a large animal. Maybe it's the size of, ranges anywhere from the size of a tiger to a smallish dinosaur. It's very nimble. It's got leathery skin. It's also described as having leathery wings, not necessarily bat wings. Maybe a little bit of scaling, but definitely leathery skin. And again, very, very nimble. There was a lot of dragon-like aspects to it. And that's what the description of Cthulhu is, according to the author, H.P. Lovecraft. But anyway, just for sake of argument, I said, okay, I will just draw a conventional Cthulhu, which we've come to see as kind of a humanoid in a squiddly diddly outfit, or kind of reminiscent of, as Mike referred to, Davy Jones, like Pirates of the Caribbean. And we've all seen this sort of image, everywhere. So I thought, okay, done that, not particularly imaginative, because I didn't I didn't have to use my brain very hard. Okay, so I thought, now wait a minute. I've got this description from H.P. Lovecraft. Let's think of biology. Let's think zoology. What kind of creature could I design that would be biologically feasible, but yet fall within the parameters of what of that description? And here we go. So it has tentacles. I put some on its nose, or let's say elongated upper lip. But the tail has kind of dragonish. Why not add some suckers down there too? There's no reason why I couldn't, because the description doesn't forbid it. And okay, I retain some aspect of octopus and squid up here, because I just think this part of the face of those cephalopods is cool. You've got these eyes that rise again above the line of the head. You often have these fleshy appendages, outgrowths from the head, which is kind of cool. This animal, here's some wings. It's probably more again of a leap glider than a powered flyer, but it certainly can enhance its ability to get around, and it's very nimble. So I thought, well, gee, let's kind of look at frogs. And so this is kind of a typical way that you would see a frog leg. This is not a exact frog leg. It's just the general shape and anatomy of a frog leg. Here sitting on his haunches. He's got a powerful tail. Kangaroos have thick tails that can almost act as a fifth limb. And this animal, interestingly enough, it doesn't have much gluteal muscles, because in animals that have such thick tails like this, if you're, let's say, non-mammalian animals with thick tails like dinosaurs and lizards, they have muscles called the caudal femoralis, which assist the hind leg actually in moving, and so they don't really have need of gluteal muscles like mammals do. Now, it's also in the descriptions, these animals snatch and grab, so they would have long forelimbs, maybe exaggeratedly long forelimbs. So I made the upper arm very long and then the lower arm very long. And the other thing that Lovecraft described is that they had long nails and talons on all 4 feet. So he was basically describing a very nimble quadruped. It was carnivorous, it was dangerous, it was really weird looking. That was one of the main things. He said, it's so weird that it's kind of hard to describe. And so this animal, definitely it's not a human being in a squid suit. And I also tried to draw it, and this is a really good exercise when you are drawing creatures, is try to imagine the creature in an unguarded moment, doing what it might do left on its own without anybody watching it. A lot of times if you watch zoo animals just be themselves, or if you're lucky to just observe animals in the wild, just watch them being themselves. And so I was imagining, what did the Cthulhu's like to do? Well, they live in rocky areas, like on the New England coast, and so they probably hang out on rocks a lot, kind of lounge around on rocks, maybe like in a panther-like way. They might, sit up and do stuff. They might, stretch, and maybe there's even some comical moments, like, oh, there's a little piece of food down here. I see him, and he's, that can be kind of funny. How do they get around? And what does the face look like when it's just, being itself? And so that's what I was thinking of when I was designing these, but I was also thinking of color. They're supposed to be greenish in color, so I made it kind of greeny, glowy in color with some bioluminescence in the wings and the parts of the body. And that is what I was thinking of when I was designing this. I was thinking also that that there's some prehensilness in this snout tentacle aspect, so that it could, it can grab you with its arms. It can also grab you with its snout, lips here, proboscis, like an elephant, and get you that way. And so the only thing I didn't do in this model sheet is describe what are the teeth like inside the mouth. I've given some clues that we've got two sets of lower canines. And so it got me to thinking that I bet you there's a lot in common with animals like warthogs, animals like wild boar, animals like archaeotheriums, which is a basic giant pig-like creature that was allied that it somewhat with the pig hippopotamus family, prehistoric creature. And so I thought for this demo that I would go ahead and investigate what does that creature look like when it's snarling. And so I guess we'll go to that, and I guess I should share my screen.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and maybe send the Magma Studio link.
Let's see. Let me copy that link. Try again here. Okay. I'm looking at two monitors. Okay, so I will put that. Let me take this, my audiobook away. Where'd it go? Here's my cursor. Okay, so I'll put this in the chat.
So for those of you who are new to Magma Studio, you'll have a subset of you, the first ones who joined in, will have the ability to sketch alongside. Keep it to the, in this case, keep it to the margins, but you can sketch ideas or things that for comment there. And then Terryl will be using the main canvas. And then while she does that and talks a little bit about what she's doing, I will also answer questions or forward questions onto her from the chat stream. And we will, I believe, at least a couple of people forward on their Cthulhu designs from the activity prompt, and we are going to and we can take a look at a couple of those as well for those who shared. I don't think we have not posted it yet. She's grabbing it now.
Yeah, I'm so I posted in the chat. I put the link in there. Now I'm trying to figure out, because I just upgraded my Mac, and so it doesn't appear exactly the same. So I'm going to try. Yep. Let me know if this here. I'm going to share this. Let me know if this what you see. Can you see? Sorry.
I don't believe your chat setting was necessarily to everyone in the group, because we're, myself included, cannot actually see the link that you shared.
I think I have to.
Yeah, sorry, it was sent to me.
Oh, okay.
I just have to open up.
Not that I mind a private chat with Terryl, but
yeah, sure. Well, Steph, Steph, do you want to throw it in the chat?
Oh yeah, I can. Perfect.
Okay. I think I have to. Okay, almost there. I may have to come right back in here, to leave the meeting, come back to it.
One moment, small technical difficulty. While she gets that set up, do folks have questions that you would like to ask of me while she gets rejoined here? She's coming back in now. All right, there's the Magma Studio link for everyone. If you want to go over and take a look. So you can grab a layer if you'd like. And everyone, of course, can observe. Terrell's reconnecting. And actually, what I can do is I'll share the screen. So hopefully you can all now see that Magma Studio page. And I think maybe we will. We want to minimize. Yeah, I think we're okay. So, so someone asked a question, what is my preferred species? So in terms of for like as inspiration for creature design, I'm not sure I could pick just one. I will say that I am most often invited to projects or commissioned on projects for my knowledge and background of large flying reptiles, of giant pterosaurs. And so that is what I often am bringing to the table for assisting on dragon designs, other large flying animal kinds of designs, things like that. So that's what I dip into most often, personally. But I've used all kinds of things, been involved in lots of different stuff. And actually to that end, the next question was the best way to learn about lesser known animals. I'm sure Terryl will have some thoughts on this as well, and we'll pick her brain here in a moment. But I would recommend visiting your local zoo and natural history museum, and looking at the exhibits there, going to the halls that aren't as often frequented. They'll have a lot of really lesser known animals often, on display, skins or skeletons. And for natural history museums, depending on where you are and what the rules are in your country and potentially province of residence, you often can get access to the collections and actually look at things up close and personal, take photos, do sketches, actually handle skeletons or skins of animals. In the United States, most of the major natural history museums are public institutions, and they have a mission to educate and provide for research, including, and that doesn't have to be traditional experimental biology. It can be researching for creature design. There is a mission there to provide access to the collections to the public for research. And so to that end, the most of the museums are, as long as your request is done professionally, politely, and isn't extreme, given some advance notice, they're almost obligated to provide access. A lot of people don't realize that. Is that in the US in particular, and a lot of other countries also, it's your museum. If it's a public museum, your taxes pay for it, right? So or support it. So it's publicly owned. They're managing the collections for the public. So it's also your museum. So I would highly recommend also making arrangements to visit collections. So visit the exhibits, visit the collections, visit the exhibits at zoos and aquariums. Now, those you usually, no matter how awesome your project is and how charismatic you are, typically they're under more restrictions because they're dealing with live animals and can't necessarily allow you to go behind the scenes. But some zoos and aquariums do have what they call like ambassador animal programs or education animal programs, where they have animals that are handable and that they take to schools and things like that for up close and personal presentations. And sometimes you can get a one-on-one or just a small group sort of presentation with an animal and get a chance to sketch one of those up close. That does happen. At LA, for example, where I'm based, LA Zoo, we have a handful of them. Now, right now, because of the pandemic, we're not doing these close encounters. But under normal conditions, we have a range of different reptiles, particularly a handful of snakes that we use for those purposes. We also have a 3-banded armadillo who we bring out, who's a great animal to sketch because it's just so unique. Everything about their look and even the way they move. They actually walk, for those who know, they actually so they walk quadrupedally, but on the forelimbs are actually walking on the tips of their claws. So they walk up on their unguligrade actually on the front, and then of course are also the diggers. And then if they get startled, they roll up into a ball. And these are the ones that can actually go into a full sphere. So nothing like sketching a spherical animal. Makes physicists very happy, right? Easy to do estimates on. That's an old physics joke for anyone who has taken the physics exam, where they're like, assume a spherical cow. Anyway, so those are things that you can definitely do. Starting animals design a base from, if for new creature design, would it be quadrupeds? I would think that what you really want at first is a diverse array of animals. But yes, for a lot of creature designs, you got to think about what art directors are often going to be looking for. They're often looking for a sort of a broadly mammalian-like plan, so it's kind of it reads with the viewer well, but then is obviously alien or unusual. So large quadrupedal mammals are a good place to start. Terryl, for example, spends a great deal of time working specifically with things like horses, for example. She's very knowledgeable, and she actually works a lot with horses in her personal time. She's a very experienced rider, and a lot of carnivorans as well. I'm sure you guys have seen that those are her bases for a lot of creatures. Speaking of, by the way, so Terryl is sketching away there on the Magma page. And we got a lot of other great sketches going on. What I will request is maybe to give Terryl a little bit more room there on the sketch page, if you could. And so a couple of you that are overlapping, maybe see if you can move what you've done over a little bit. But for the most part, I think it's working out just fine. And then I don't know if she's been able to get reconnected to audio. I do apologize for the lag on my stream on that, but it'll reload here at regular intervals, and hopefully you guys will be able to see it. Hopefully she can get back on audio so she can answer questions as well. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, here I am, and
oh, good.
I'm back. I was drawing. I was being so intent on drawing that I didn't turn myself on.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. Great. So yeah, so I'm gonna pitch a couple of these to you now, Terryl. Actually, first and foremost, what would you say are good starter animals to design a base from, or if you're new to creature design? I kind of answered what I thought you might say, or things I know that you often use, but I'd rather you respond for you than me respond for you. So what do you think? I mean, for me, it's because I'm a flight specialist, my bases are often, like I said, flying animals, but that's kind of a unique niche.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. I would say it depends, of course, what the story is, what kind of creature you're designing for what type of story. If it's a mount, say for World of Warcraft, you would probably want to base it on, I would say, a good guess might be equine or horse anatomy. Horses are good animals to study extensively because so much of creature design and animation is based on their locomotion, their ability to get around, and also they do happen to be the animal that's depicted the most in movies and film and animation, as well as in the history of art through the centuries. So horses, are very challenging to draw. They're one of the most difficult animals to draw, and yet ironically, they are the animal that is the most influential as far as creature design, animation in general. If you have a sense of how horses are put together, that is very helpful. Other common animals, will be the cat family, the dog family. There's elephants. In fact, in my creature anatomy course that I teach, we study the animals that appear, the animal types that appear the most in animation, etc., which should be, let's see, fish, reptiles, amphibians. Those are really good for dragons and space aliens, things like that. Sea serpents. Birds, obviously for animals that fly. There's a lot of bird characters. Dinosaurs, of course, are great for dragons and Godzilla and who knows what else. Then of course, I mentioned before the various carnivores, particularly the felines and canines, horses in particular, and other hoofed mammals, and then elephants. So those are the main groups that seem to appear the most often. And they have anatomies that you can adapt to most other animals. And of course, with mammals, there's a whole lot of commonalities that they have. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, rabbit anatomy is not that much different from cat anatomy. And in vertebrate animals in general, that is backbone animals, they all have a basic anatomy plan that with steady repetition, you see recurring patterns. Now, of course, there are the invertebrate animals, which would be anything from sea anemones, octopuses, worms, bees, butterflies, starfish, Portuguese man of war, scallops, even corals and sponges. And their body plans, oh my gosh, it would take you, that'd be about, 5 creature courses to cover, just cover all those animals. There's so many different body plans, and they tend not to be used as much as main creatures. One of the reasons is because they lack the facial features that make characters so endearing. Even in those Cthulhu's, those conventional Cthulhu's that we saw, it's pretty much people faces with tentacles coming out of them, and that's to get expression. If you look at the films and productions that do have invertebrates as main characters, let's say A Bug's Life and Ants, if you look at their faces, they're actually little mammal faces. They're not insect faces. Insects require a lot of gestural acting to get the point across, and you can do it, but it's a lot of gesture. It's very, very important, as opposed to facial features. Because once you start putting facial features on an insect, it starts to turn into a mammal. So that's something to keep an aspect of. And in order to create a sympathetic, realistic invertebrate, you really have to master the art of gestural pantomime, physical acting to get that. The animal has to act the same way a dancer acts with their bodies to convey happiness or sadness, that sort of thing. And in mammals, you can cheat that a great deal. Mammals or fish or anything with a backbone, we can. It's a lot easier to get expression, facial expression, etc.
And it's worth noting, I'll just pitch in as well, that anything, if you're doing facial expressions in anything that isn't a mammal, you are cheating to a certain degree. Now, it's a much easier cheat with other vertebrates because they have these cranial anatomy and such. But mammals uniquely have facial muscles. The homologous muscles, the equivalent muscles in other animals, other vertebrates, are on the neck. And so if you look at what like lizards and things do for their expression, they express with their neck, dewlaps and frills and all these things that come up around the neck, right? But they don't actually have facial muscles. but it's a fairly easy thing to do to essentially map some facial muscles onto a bird face or a crocodile face or something like that and make it smile because they have equivalent anatomy, whereas, like Terryl said, the insects don't at all. But that is something worth noting, just kind of a general anatomy standpoint, is that mammalian expressions are actually a very unique thing, which is kind of cool and beautiful in its own right, but also can represent a potential challenge for creature design.
Yeah.
Whenever you're dealing with anything that's clearly non-mammalian.
With some reptiles, it's a little easier because like crocodiles and alligators have built-in smiles. When I look at them in the zoo, it's like they always know. It's like their expressions are such that you think there's a secret that they know about and they're not telling. But it's because the shape of their jaws make it have a permanent smile, and so I always thought that was funny. Dolphins, of course, are mammals. They have permanent smiles too. So what I'm thinking about here in my, come on, let me get my brush bigger. There's my eraser. Is this animal, it has a very flexible face. He's able to bring aspects of the corners of his lips upward in kind of a snarl. And of course my drawing is pretty rough right now, but the muscles of the face are pushing up the wrinkles of the skin on his nose area where I'm closest to the eyes. And these are all important things to think about when you're putting expressions. How does one part of the facial expression affecting other parts of the facial expression? And I also have, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, finish that, Terryl. And I will answer another question in the chat.
Okay, I also have to think of the cheek muscles here, the cedar muscles, the powerful chewing muscles here. When the mouth is open, they are stretching downwards, following the angle of the jaw. And then I have to think about how is the tongue line in the mouth. In a snarling animal, it's not really going to be sticking its tongue out because it's not yawning, and unless it's trying to taste you somehow like a snake, it's not going to be sticking its tongue out. Its tongue is either going to curl back in kind of a protective way, or it's going to be laying flat on the lower palate of the jaw. So here I have basically my rough sketch of the open mouth of this Cthulhu creature. And when I was thinking about it, thinking about the dentition, and of course I can start by giving it, as I did in my sketch, it's got two sets of fairly sharp, quite prominent lower canines, with this other one down here. Which led me to think about the rest of the dentition. Let me just move this corner of the mouth here because that tooth's in the way. And this animal is predatorial. It's a very adaptable animal. And I was thinking of, with the long jaws, long face, naturally I was thinking of animals of the swine family, which would be like wild boar, pigs in general, warthogs, babirusa, which are pretty bizarre because they have a set of upper canines which actually grow through the roof of the mouth in the males, and giant forest hogs, just long faces. And these animals, all these animals are omnivorous. That means they not only eat plants, but they can eat and happily will eat meat as well. So your domestic pig, you know, he's giving you, if he's big enough, he might look at you and think, human bacon. They can be quite dangerous, especially, you know, the wild boar. We've got their descendants in the United States and Canada. They're known as razorbacks, and they can be very, very dangerous animals. And their dentition reflects that. Most hoofed animals, except for horses and the swine family, tend to lack upper canines, especially, and upper incisors. The artiodactylids, which would be, you know, deer and giraffes and camels. Well, camels are kind of a mixture of things, but deer, giraffe, antelope, those animals, they lack upper incisors, and most lack canines, both lower and upper. Pigs and hippopotamuses, which are somewhat allied with swine, they have a full set of dentition, so that's cool. And so therefore, I'm going to show a little bit of the gum of this fearsome beast and make them really even pointier than what pigs have incisors. Make them extra big because he's extra fierce. And swine are interesting that some of their incisors kind of curve around a little bit. So you've got some extra ones here, make them pointy. And then they have molars, which are kind of pointy, you know, all the way back to about here. But I thought to myself, what about if this animal, and this is another amalgamation, had, instead of, you know, molars, what if this animal just had sets of carnassial teeth like felines and canines have, which are sets of these really vicious shearing teeth that happen behind, you know, the canines. There's a canine here. And those teeth are self-sharpening. They're really, really vicious, and they tend to look like this. Several peaks and valleys, and they shear off each other, and that's what allows a cat to just use those teeth to just shear meat off the bone. So I'm going to give this guy that too.
So we had a really great question in the chat a moment ago. I'd love to hear you weigh in on this as well, which is a favorite random animal fact, which I don't think I can pick just one, but for the moment, I'm going to pick the one that you and I were talking about earlier when we were setting up today, which is I love the fact that bony fish, Tilias fish, have both oral jaws and pharyngeal jaws. They actually have two sets of jaws, one of which is in their throat. And some of you may be aware that moray eels can actually protrude theirs, and they can do the Aliens film thing where it comes out and they bite you again with an inner set of jaws. But a lot of other fish actually have less mobile, non-protruding pharyngeal jaws, but still very powerful ones that have a different kind of structure altogether than the oral jaws. So your goldfish, for example, does have teeth. It just does not have teeth on the oral jaws. That's why it's a suction feeder up front, because it looks like a cute little vacuum. But in the back are nasty pointy teeth, and that's why you see them doing their head bob after they suck in food. They are chewing, or more like just horribly stabbing their food with their pharyngeal jaws, with their throat. You can see the same thing in your pet betta, you name it. And one of my favorite kind of funny stories is someone who has a good bit of family from the deep south of the United States. Is some of you may be familiar with the catfish catching strategy of noodling. Anyone here ever heard of noodling? And
Don't do it.
don't do it. If you're not familiar with this, here's how it works. You wade around in deep, murky water and you feel around with your hands for a burrow that you think a catfish is in. And you stick your hand in there and hope it is a catfish and not something else. And then you hope that the catfish bites your hand with the oral jaws only, and you yank out the catfish, and you've caught a catfish and you cook it up for dinner. Problem is, one, it might be something other than a catfish in that hole. And second of all, if the catfish gets a better lunge than average, it will get past the oral jaws, which are toothless. That's the kind of suction portion, and it will get you with its pharyngeal jaws. And the pharyngeal jaws in catfish typically come in two varieties: crushers, which will smash the bones of your hand, or blades, which will guillotine your fingers. And so there are people who have actually lost function of, or just the entirety of their fingers, noodling catfish. Because they have throat jaws that are blades. Anyway, so that's my fun one for the day. I've lots of other fun animal facts I love, but that's my one for the day. Terryl, what is your favorite animal fact, at least at this particular moment in time?
Oh my goodness, that's a hard one. I'm trying hard to think of my favorite. But I think one thing I like is the fact that we're discovering, new species all the time. And most of the time, these tend to be, smaller animals, because bigger animals are easier to see. But an animal that is commonly seen in zoos today, and is absolutely beautiful and spectacular animal, and actually quite creaturely, was not known, at least to Western civilization. It was known among the native peoples of that region, of course, but even so, it was a little bit mysterious. But it was not known to Western civilization until 1901. And this animal had been around for, since the Pleistocene, at least. This animal is as large as a horse, and it's a relative of an even larger animal that we are very familiar with. And it's a very beautiful animal. It's chocolatey brown with zebra stripes on its forelegs and its hind quarters. And again, this is a large animal. For a while, it was just like hearsay and legend. They were calling it the African unicorn. They thought it was some sort of forest zebra. And it's the okapi. And so there's an example of a very primeval, as far as mammals, large megafauna go, creature. It's a forest giraffe, basically. And there used to be a whole lot of other giraffe, not just the tall, lithe, skinny ones that we know today, but there was a whole lot of prehistoric giraffes that were all different shapes and sizes. And the okapi is one of those remnants of that, the forest giraffe. Beautiful animal, and the fact that it wasn't discovered until relatively recently, that's just one of my favorite stories, because it seems like almost discovering a dinosaur. I like that story a lot. Did we lose any audio or?
Nope, I don't think so. I was just dealing with, I had a small technical glitch there. I was just dealing with, but I think we're good. So that's one of my personal favorites as well. Fantastic story. And we have another question. It says, Terryl, have you ever considered taking on a project that explores a completely alien world through creature creation? Other creature artists have done something like this, like Fragments of the Past lore, or the world of Anu, or the world of Biren. And of course, the first thing that jumps to my mind is Cthulhu Odyssey. But I won't step on your toes there. I will let you. I'll let you respond, of course, how you see fit. But the answer, by the way, is yes.
Yes, yes, I have. Mike mentioned my own property, the Terryl Odyssey, which takes place on an Earth-like planet, and there aren't any people or humanoids on it, and it's populated entirely by animals, all different species from the past and the present, living together. And the thing to think about with world building is you have to think of the politics, to think of ecosystems, storms, the list goes on, trade, commerce, religion, all those things. And but I worked on many um, world building gigs um, prior to that, and actually even currently, I'm working on a large video game project in which I cannot say much, but it's an alien world, actually several alien worlds together. And of course, the challenge is, when you're creating aliens, it usually often they say, oh, create something that's never been created before. What happens is if you try to do that, then it doesn't work very well because we can't relate to it. And so that's why when you see alien worlds, that almost all the creatures and flora, for that matter, resemble things that we're familiar with on planet Earth. So we really can't conceive of non creatures that are so alien that we would not be able to recognize them as even life. So just about all productions I can think of, from Avatar to Star Wars to Star Trek. Star Trek has tried to create aliens that don't have any resemblance to creatures on planet Earth, but it usually doesn't work too well, and by their own admission. And so anything that you invent is going to remind you of something that exists here in some form or aspect. So I guess I worked on many world building projects, but I've never worked on a project where the life forms are so alien that they could not be interpreted. So I hope that's kind of an okay answer.
I would call that a brilliant answer, and I imagine everyone else agrees. Yeah, so fantastic question, and thank you for throwing out there. And yeah, Terryl, you are an excellent world builder, actually a master of the craft. And I will say that I can't say more than this, but Terryl and I may be doing some joint world building for a project that we have just started to launch and pitch. So you can look and see what weird things we come up with by our powers combined. Hopefully in the not too distant future. But yes. Oh yes, there was questions about the name of that's Terryl Odyssey. Thank you very much, Aether, for putting that in there. And was there also, I think someone was looking for, oh yeah, okay, that was the name I'm looking for. Perfect. All right, great. Are there other questions? Oh, actually, I see one already. In learning anatomy and creature design, do you tend to be more self-taught to learn from other professionals? So in I'll speak for myself first, and then Terrell's answer, I imagine, will be more informative in this regard. But what I will say is that I was formally instructed in anatomy. I actually hold a doctorate in functional anatomy and evolution. But from a creature design application standpoint, that was something that became kind of more of a self-taught, experiential kind of deal. I originally got involved in creature design projects because I was a specialist in pterosaur anatomy as a graduate student, and there was some interest from a couple of different shows in bringing in the winged reptile guy, basically to help them. Actually, the first thing I ever worked on was a dragon build, which is still to date, I think, what I've done most often. and giant flying reptiles, right? It's not really a surprise. And I kind of just learned a little bit more about the process in that project. And then that was enough to get me onto another project and so on and so forth. And so I kind of learned by doing in a way, but the underlying expertise, the foundational stuff in my case, does mostly come from a lot of an excessive amount of formal schooling. But I also have a lot of animal behavior, observational experience from being a zookeeper and things that, where it's a little less formalized. So a little bit of on-job stuff there as well. But and of course I've done a lot of research in anatomy. I've published quite a number of papers. And so I learn a lot every time I do a research project, as all scientists do. And so I spent a lot of time just in the collections of the museum, opening drawers and looking at stuff and getting inspiration from that. So I've learned a lot about individual species just by just jumping in, but I do actually have a formal credential in anatomy, with, in my case, the creature design being something that I learned kind of on the job. But Terryl has a very interesting story. Of course, she's the real master here. So Terryl, do you want to take a shot at answering the same question? In learning anatomy and creature design, do you tend to be more self-taught or learn from other professionals?
I would say for myself that I tend to be self-taught. This is going from a very, very early age. I loved to draw. I was fascinated and loved to draw animals ever since I can remember. And I loved them so much that I wanted to understand how they worked, and I wanted to be able to capture that by depicting them. And so I do remember, though, I was inspired from about the age of 5 when I first became aware of these artists, of some of the top wildlife and paleo artists that were working at that time. I would say the first one I encountered, which to this day is one of my uber heroes, and he's still living and still producing, and his name is Jay Maternis. He did these spectacular murals from the Smithsonian Institution of Cenozoic mammals. And to this day, I just love them so much. And I just wanted to be able to do something like that when I grew up. That was my whole modus operandi as a young person. And my whole intent was to be a natural history illustrator, which I still do a lot of that, but Jay Materns. I was also inspired, also from a very young age, when my parents gave me a book called The Giant Golden Book of Mammals, illustrated by Bob Kuhn, one of the foremost wildlife illustrators ever. He put so much soul and action and anatomy into wildlife, real animals, and those two gentlemen, I would say those are my heroes. There's also another artist that was highly inspirational to me. His name was William Berry, Bill Berry, Berry. He's also deceased, but he did beautiful drawings, primarily for field guides, and especially of Alaskan wildlife, moose and wolves and bear, just incredible. And whenever I get into a jam, or I think, oh, my animal's not looking very good, I ask myself what those artists would do. And if I'm doing an imaginary animal, it's the same thing. If they were doing this imaginary animal, what would they do? And that's really, really helpful to me. But the anatomy and the sheer hard work of learning to draw animals well, that came from myself. It was my own initiative. From like I said, from very early on, I copied animal anatomy books. I watched countless National Geographic specials. I just loved those. I drew as many animals as I could. I was very fortunate in that my father, who taught high school biology, would take my sister and I to zoos and museums every other weekend. I was drawing with my little sketch pad there. I was also very fortunate. My grandfather had a horse ranch, so the first furry animal I touched was a horse, and so those were always in my life. But I never took a class in how to draw animals. So I took courses in general illustration and painting and watercolor and lots and lots and lots of life drawing. I did a lot of figure drawing, both figure drawing, heads and hands, etc. But I never took an animal drawing course. I was mentored to some extent by Gene Chrisman, who was the senior scientific illustrator at UC Berkeley. He came to my high school and gave a talk, and I was just captivated. I thought, this is a way I can combine science and art, and I am forever indebted to Gene Chrisman, who mentored me even throughout my high school years. He always welcomed me into his office and taught me some techniques and things, and was always so very supportive. So that's my story. And then when I majored in zoology, because I had studied so much animal life prior to that, I already came in equipped with a whole bunch of knowledge, and so it was easy for me to ace my comparative anatomy courses and things like that. So yeah, a lot of this, being a creature designer, it takes a lot of self-initiative and a lot of dedication. So I would say for all of you, if you want to be good, competent, and great creature designers, learn as much as you can about real animals, inhale all the David Attenborough wildlife specials that you can, and read, and yeah, that will, the more you know about zoology, the better creature designer you'll be. And that includes paleontology, which is sort of a subset of zoology. So that's my long answer to a short question.
It deserved a long answer because it was a great question, and I love hearing your story. I've heard it multiple times now, but I love your background and how you got to where you are, because I think it's really cool and unique. But it hits on a lot of the, highlights a lot of the things that people can look to do. So hopefully that's a good inspiration for everyone here. I know I find it very inspiring, and in sort of a similar vein of being inspired, and probably the last question we'll be able to handle for today, because we're coming up on our time here, is from Spartaco. I hope I am pronouncing it correctly. Do you both create characters or creatures that are superbly experimental in your mind, and as such push the idea of what characters could be? This individual feels that sometimes characters and creatures are not pushing the limits of the craft. And what are our thoughts on that? So it sounds like kind of general question, thoughts on, do we try to push the craft and maybe win? And do we feel that other builds do or don't? Which is a fairly open-ended question. And I will just quickly say that that it depends a lot on the project. So when I'm given a lot of creative leeway, such as like when Terryl and I are working on one of our collaborations and kind of building what we want, I'd say it's a mix, but we do tend to push the limits quite a bit. But in terms of trying to be very novel and such. But on the other hand, many times you have a commissioned project, or I'm hired as a consultant, something, and they have something a little bit more traditional, if you will, in mind, and that's what you have to deliver, or that's what I have to help them deliver, because that's the job. So Tara, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with that. A lot of times when an art director will say, and I've heard this so many times, we want to create something that's never been seen before. You get something that you've always seen before, because people tend to shy away from the unconventional back to the conventional, because that's what they know, and that's what they think that the audience expects. And so that's why you often get creatures that tend to look like something you've seen before. Basically, Mike and I play a lot around with tweaking the fringes of what's possible in the natural world, and given those parameters, like making monkeys fly, how could that conceivably be done given Earth gravity and Earth physics? Now, if you go off planet, if we were going to go to a very hostile environment, say it's Jupiter, the atmosphere above Jupiter, because you definitely don't want to go to the surface of Jupiter, because I don't think anything could possibly exist on the surface of Jupiter. But there is a whole huge gaseous atmosphere which actually makes up the bulk of the planet. That what kind of life forms could live there? And there's different, forces of gravity on there, and that's where you can, if you go off planet, you can start to really push the limits. But there's an interplay there, because if you push limits too far, then the audience is not going to recognize your creation as being alive. It might be, oh, that's an interesting looking cloud thing. So there's kind of a tension there of what the human brain can conceive of and understand. One thing that George Lucas famously said is that if you want the audience to relate to a character, even no matter how weird it is, it has to have some sort of a physical attribute, usually some sort of a face or the head end of the creature that the audience can engage with. And trying to think of, the most extreme Lucas creature design I can think of, which I did not design, although I worked on aspects of it, would have been the Sarlacc pit, which is basically a giant pit that you fall into and it eats you. But then I thought, wait a minute, that reminds me a lot of certain invertebrates like jellyfishes and the mouths of cephalopods and such, or even a lamprey, which is a vertebrate, a lamprey fish mouth. So there we go, back to Earth again. And so there is that tension. So a lot of times, for the most part, what Mike and I do is push limits of creature design that exist within the parameters of an Earth-like adventure. But if we went off planet, then we can get, pretty wild. I hope that's a good answer.
I think that's a spectacular answer. And what I'm going to end with here, I'm actually pulling up our presentation from last year, because I think it, for a moment, or one part of it, because I think that really speaks to what you were just talking about, the Etheragon being, you go off world. So this is an off world build for like our gas giant, for example. And if you just want to say a couple of words on this guy as our last bit, that would be, I think that might be a great way to wrap up, given what you just responded with.
Okay, well, so we were talking about designing dragons last year, and then we decided to go off planet into a gas giant. And in this particular planet, it's really it's a low gravity planet. In other words, you can get really, really, really big. You know how blue whales get ginormous because they're not having to deal with supporting their body weight. Well, in the atmosphere of this giant gas planet, it's almost acting like an ocean. And so these animals get so huge. And obviously the ancestors of this animal at one point, maybe they were imported into this planet, because you can see the little tiny arms and legs there. But they don't need to use them anymore. So they're just kind of there as vestigials, or maybe little steering mechanisms. You can see spiracles along the sides of the body that help breathe in and exude out air. The animal is taking in large amounts of atmosphere to stay buoyant, in kind of like a hot air balloon. And so you can see steam that's coming out from the spiracles on the top. Those top fins actually have holes at the top of them, and you can see steam going, emerging from that. So it's taking in atmosphere, and then it exudes the steam with waste products and such. And that's how this animal exists. Those red structures there, those are giant air sacs off the lungs. You can see it going all the way through down the throat, all the way to the end of the tail. And so it's this, we wanted to create the ultimate steampunk creature. And so that's what this Etheragon is. And
ether or ether refers to, it's an Age of Enlightenment term meaning the air or atmosphere. That's how we gave it its name, the ether dragon. I can't say it very well, but that's the story behind that.
Still one of my favorite creature build stories, your steampunk dragon. So with that, we are a little bit over time actually, and I know folks have other presentations such need to get to. As a reminder, this has been recorded, and so you will be able to rewatch it on lightboxexpo.com at your leisure. Shortly after. It'll take a little time to upload the large file, but it'll be up soon. You can rewatch it. Thank you to everyone for attending. Of course, thank you to Terryl for being a fantastic partner in creation of all kinds of wonderful things, and a true inspiration and just a delightful friend. I also want to give a little shout out to attendee Stephanie Fitzsimmons, who was kind enough to help us with the link issue earlier, and who is actually an old and dear friend of mine, which is why I was referring to her as Steph. I wasn't trying to be unprofessional, just so everyone knows. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for attending. And there is a creature design Discord channel that's been shared around that a lot of folks from our talk last year bounced into. And I recommend, if you're interested in this topic, that you maybe check that out, because it's well managed. It's a good crew of people. I pop in there from time to time, and hopefully we'll see everyone around the LBX Discord as well. You can find both Terryl and I on Instagram. I also have a Twitter account with handle ArrowEvo that you can look for me there and enjoy. And for those who haven't done the activity prompt yet, that will remain up as well. You can take a shot at that. So cheers, everyone. Have a wonderful, safe rest of your weekend. Create good art. Think of great things. Have wonderful adventures. And as always, be your wonderful, delightful, amazing, and brilliant selves. Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.